Welcome to another episode of our personal empowerment audio series, Finding Yourself in Paradise. Hi, I'm Michael Benner.
And I'm Steve Snyder. And, of course, every once in a while we want to remind you that the paradise we're talking about is not an actual place, but rather a state of mind. And the self that you find there is the higher self, the part of you that's awake and aware and knows that it can pay attention to your individual thoughts and feelings and choose which ones. And my higher self chose a particular thought today as a topic. I think we're going to talk about the subject of anger.
Oh, that pisses me off.
Yeah, everything from frustration to rage, everything from the experience of deep depression all the way up through a homicidal, maniacal violence. It's a really powerful subject, anger, and I think personally the ability to manage it is the one thing I look for first in terms of determining how mature or how evolved I think somebody else is. Somebody who can experience anger and not do so angrily, to me, is a pretty evolved person.
I think that does say a lot. That's a good point. Also, at the beginning, we need to point out that whenever we talk about emotional control, any kind of emotional management, and anger is no exception, we're not talking about repression or oppression or suppression, choose your word. We're talking about managing, because appropriate levels of anger might be necessary, might be called for. Well, I already used the word, might be appropriate in a certain instance to create a level of awareness. But are you the anger? Are you a victim of your own anger? Or are you willing to find that higher self that can put it in the proper perspective?
Yeah, because anger can be so very destructive, not only to yourself, but to everyone around you, because it makes people afraid. When you express anger angrily, people are afraid of your potential violence. They're afraid you might hurt them. Anger gives the impression that you are on the attack. So when we express angrily, we push people away. Now, interestingly enough, when we get beneath the anger down to the hurt that caused the anger, and we express the hurt, that tends to bring people closer to us. When we say, wow, what you just said really, I got really angry because I realized it pushed a button and it made me understand how I don't like myself in that particular area. When you can get down and start talking like that, you bring people closer. But when you say, and you just yell at people, that always pushes them away.
I think anger is a great example of what we have to call emotional intoxication, because anger can very quickly cascade and get out of control and drive you out of your mind. Who could deny having said things in anger that later they regretted, or maybe even were baffled at? How could I act like that? How could I say such a thing? Often we get defensive and refuse to admit it, but, there's got to be that one little corner of your mind or your heart where you're accepting on some level, yeah, I have been angry enough in my life that I was out of control. And if I'm out of control based on an emotion, well, then I might be afraid to feel any emotion or all of my fear-based emotions. We need to point that out also, that essentially we've only got two kinds of emotions, love-based and fear-based. So anything that hurts or upsets you, irritates you, frustrates you, anything that's negative in any way is a fear-based emotion. So not only does anger frighten people when you're directing your anger at them, what we know is that also the angry person is coming from a place of fear too.
Ultimately, beneath the anger is hurt, and beneath the hurt is some kind of fear.
And that's a finer point. I think that may be our primary message today. How do you manage anger? You find the hurt. That doesn't occur to most people.
Yeah, that's what you have to do.
You can live your whole life with bouts of anger and never realize that anger is made out of hurt that's never been addressed, that's never been realized or owned. And part of it is just because we're such victims. You made me angry.
That's it. Yeah,
You're the reason. I'm out of control, but you did it to me. The idea that we have to be angry at someone or angry at something or some event is ridiculous. We can just be angry for reasons we're not aware of.
Yeah, and even when we're angry at someone, the perspective of they made me angry takes away all responsibility.
It's absurd.
You have no ability to respond.
Remember the guy that called my talk show back in the day, and it became a classic call. He said, Michael, people make me get into fights.
Oh, yeah. Every time I go into a bar, somebody makes me get into a fight. I have no say in it, you know.
It was even more removed than, well, you know, that anger comes out of your heart. It was beyond the anger to they not only hurt me and make me angry, they make me get into fights. And
yeah, like what would you do if somebody looked at you that way? You know, he dissed me. I mean, he just looked at me the wrong way. I had no choice but to fight him. You know, the anger is inside, you know, and it's what we do with it that is the key. And I think the less mature we are, the more likely we are to burst out with it just in any direction. I mean, babies do not hold their anger in. You know, when they're upset, they just burst out in any direction they can, lash out at anything they can. Maturity comes as we learn to experience that anger, and I think, again, get beneath it to what hurts. Because as long as we think anger is about something, a reaction to something somebody else did, rather than a reaction to a pain inside of ourselves, then we don't have any power. Somebody once, Nancy Coleman, you know Nancy Coleman. Sure. I used to work with her many, many years ago. She said something, I don't know if she made it up or it was a quote, but I think the words were something like, if you could hurt me, it shows me there's something in me that needs to be healed. So that was like a big, like, once I got that anger's always about me hurting, and that if I hurt, then there's something that's wounded, there's something that needs to be healed inside of me. And then if I look at that, what hurts and why that made me angry kind of thing, then I can talk about that. I can express that to anyone without pushing them away. In fact, in close, intimate relationships, it's one of the things that can bring people closest. In my relationship with my wife, when there were times when we were angry, if I started yelling, it always pushed her away. In fact, it was really bad for our relationship. And what she did when she got angry was this passive-aggressive, being kind of mean and unkind, and, you know. But once we started expressing the hurts that we were feeling underneath it, that brought us much closer together than we were before we started. So anger can be a great thing if you can find out why it hurts and talk about the pain that you're experiencing with your partner.
You're talking about what I'll describe as the electromagnetism of negative emotion. Let me say, I think those are Nancy's words, but they remind me of a similar quotation by Eleanor Roosevelt, which is that no one can make you feel inferior without your consent.
Yeah.
Emotionally, nobody can hurt you without your buy-in.
You know, you have buttons. People push your buttons, but some people walk around with very shiny buttons. You know, they say, hey, push my button here.
Yeah, and we're the ones that wired the buttons.
Yes, indeed.
You know, even if you choose not to choose, you've still made a choice. So we're going to talk today about how to rewire some of those buttons, not so much so that you can avoid being angry, because there are times when righteous indignation is appropriate and can be a wonderful motivating force. Let's be clear. If you have a teacher, some Swami, guru, mystic, religious preacher that says anger is always a bad thing, you got to take a breath and slow down and go a little deeper with the teacher, because anger can be a wonderful thing. What's bad is when we don't recognize it, when we become emotionally intoxicated, when we, as Steve is just saying, project it or blame other people for making us angry. You've got a story about a guy down in your end of the island that refused to apologize for his violence, saying, well, you knew I was a violent guy. You shouldn't have made me angry because you knew I was. That the story?
That's pretty much it. He goes, you knew me. You've known me all my life. You know I hit people when I get angry. You shouldn't have made me angry because you knew I was
your fault for making me angry.
That's right.
Well, I guess it's similar to people make me get into fights, isn't it? So this helplessness, this victimization has to be addressed right up front. But also the idea that in and of itself, anger is not bad. Like everything in life, it's what do you do with it? I mean, fear may not be a bad thing. Loneliness may not be a bad thing. These are little lights and gauges on the dashboard of life. They're feedback loops, and they're very valuable. Wouldn't you like to see anger coming a mile away? Wouldn't it be wonderful if you had trained yourself consciously with meditation and mindfulness and study to feel how it feels in the body when you begin to get angry, and to see it not only as anger but hurt that's being evoked from you, and that, as Steve just said, it's less about the stimulus than the fact that it's coming out of you, and you're seeing it a mile away, so you can do something about it now. Again, we're not talking about repressing your anger so that you blow up later on down the road or down the calendar page. We're talking about managing it. We're talking about balance, I think.
Yeah, because as you said, there is no life without experiencing anger. And you know what? No matter how placid your life is, there's a great Van Morrison line. He said, people say love your neighbor and turn the other cheek, but nobody can really be that meek. You know, I mean, like, there's got to be times when you got to stand up for yourself. If I get bad service again and again, then I think righteous indignation, as you said, being angry with bad service is appropriate sometimes.
Well, what about this esteemed professor at Harvard University who was arrested in his home for breaking into his home a couple of weeks ago? I don't know if you heard about that.
I didn't.
It was outrageous. I mean, he had a driver's license on him that says, I live here. And still, they arrested him because he was a black guy having a little trouble getting his key to work. So somebody called the cops. Why? Because he was a black guy. Should he not be angry? I think, slavery and Jim Crow and racial profiling and what people of color often have to go through, he ought to be angry. But violence would not help. I'm sure
it would make it 1,000 times worse.
And to not be able to manage his anger, I don't know all the details or the particulars of the incident. I think tempers flared a little bit on both sides. But who was it? Wasn't it Helen Keller that said, without adversity, without reasons to be angry, there would be little opportunity for bravery and patience in the world, that it's part and parcel of just the adversity and the conflict in life. So, again, I'm glad I've got a feedback light on the dashboard, on my emotional dashboard, that may go off and say anger, but I want it to be as sensitive as possible so that I can nip it in the bud by saying, I'm starting to feel sort of angry here. I'm starting to get pissed. If this continues, I may not say that out loud, but if I can just pause and be aware enough to say to myself, if something doesn't change here pretty soon, you're going to get really out of control. You've seen yourself do it. What can I do now? And Steve, it's got to be what you've already suggested. Take some ownership of the fact that this is coming from you, number one. The stimulus is done to you, but the emotion is coming from you. And then we need to go a little deeper into this, find the hurt, because that's all it is. You hurt me again, life hurts me. Well, it wasn't you, but somebody else hurt me, and now it's you piling on, and I can only be hurt so many times before I get angry.
It's got to be find the hurt, because if I didn't hurt, I wouldn't be angry. Like if I felt good, what would I be angry? I'm only angry when I don't feel good. So it's a big, huge clue. It's like something hurts. Stop. Take one slow, conscious, deep breath and ask what hurts. Ask what hurts. I mean, where is the pain? There's so many ways you can ask, like, what part of my body hurts? Or what emotion am I feeling when I get beneath the anger and I start to realize something? Or am I feeling this like is a now thing, or is this like an old thing? Like does this have a big history to it? Or is this an anticipation thing? Am I afraid of something that's going to happen? Your mind knows a lot of information about what you're feeling, and you just need to ask and listen and be real creative in the questions that you ask. But the most important thing is you're on like a stream of consciousness, going down a stream of consciousness of anger, and if you keep going down that stream, there's a waterfall that you're gonna go over the edge. If you keep going down that stream, you've got to change courses in midstream. You've got to get out of that stream of consciousness. You've got to switch gears and go from I'm getting angrier and angrier and angrier to I'm getting angry. Oh, wait a minute. What hurts? That's the switch.
Somewhere along the line in politics, in contemporary discussion, current events, I think it may have been the late 70s, early 80s when I started noticing that being a bleeding heart liberal was a bad thing. And there used to be conservatives and liberals in both parties. But somehow, in the Reagan era, I think, it began to separate so that all the conservatives drifted over to the GOP side, and the bleeding hearts all became Democrats. Now, I don't think that's true. I think there are a lot of bleeding heart conservatives, but they just don't call themselves that. But to have a bleeding heart, why is that a bad thing? To be sensitive, to care. to empathize. This is a big controversial word, again, in the last few weeks with the Supreme Court Justice Sotomayor. Is she empathetic, right? Well, of course, we want people to be sensitive to their emotional nature, just not run by the emotions. I mean, I am a much better person for my sensitivity than I would be if I were insensitive and then prone to a sudden outburst that caught me by surprise. So I like my emotional nature. I just don't want it driving the car. It can sit in the back seat. It can be part of me, but it needs to be balanced with reason. And then, of course, the higher self we find in paradise that stands above both reason and emotion and gives us an elevated perspective where we can be the manager of the feelings rather than a victim of them.
Yeah. I haven't done a whole lot of things in my life that I'm ashamed of, but virtually every one of the things that I've done that I am ashamed of is due to an inappropriate expression of anger. It's due to yelling and screaming and having a tantrum. When I was a little boy, it was temper tantrums, and it changed. I mean, I was never physically violent with anybody, but I got so in people's face angry, like especially girlfriends or people that, I don't know. To me, the greatest sign of my maturity for myself was to catch that and not go there. I haven't gone there in a long time with anyone except a little while ago with my wife, and I caught it and changed our relationship in a real wonderful way. I'd gone a decade without experiencing any of that yelling stuff, and a decade of being married to my wife, and circumstances shifted, and all of a sudden I found this hurt come up, and I started getting real angry and yelling. But shortly thereafter, I did catch myself in a pattern that I was in earlier in my life, and realized, okay, wait a minute now, wake up here. There's hurt. What's the hurt all about? And that was the key.
That we can be in 2009 and really not have skills unless you've consciously attended self-help seminars, personal development, or done therapy of some sort, or maybe you're a professional in the field. What are we offered? I mean, the only thing I can think of is I learned along the way sometime to count to 10. Well,
Tom Jefferson said, count to 10. If that doesn't work, count to 100.
Who said that?
Thomas Jefferson.
Oh, really? Well, it always seemed to me it's the wrong direction in the first place. Like count to 10 and then I'll hit you in the jaw. Yeah. If you're going to count, wouldn't it make more sense to count backwards from 10?
Like hypnotists do,
Yeah. 3, 2. Hey, dude, it's okay.
That's way better. Way better.
But I think part of it also has got to be breathing. Don't we have to talk about the importance of breath in managing negative emotions?
I mean, think about anger and breathing. Where is your breathing when you're angry? It's short, it's raspy, it's powerful, and it's moving toward this rage kind of place. So the brain now, the unsophisticated part of the brain only knows these love-fear things, really, So this is on the fear side. Even though it doesn't feel like you're afraid, it feels like you're angry. And even though you can get below the anger and recognize this is what hurt to cause me to express and be angry, beneath the hurt, there is fear. And often, if not usually, it's fear of the unknown. There's something you don't know that's causing you to be scared,
I think all fear is fear of the unknown. But I totally agree with you. I think we can see it in the junkyard dog. If that dog is seemingly mean and snarling at you and threatening you by baring its teeth, it's because that animal is frightened, right? Same thing, if somebody is trying to frighten you, it's because they're coming from, we're saying hurt, but the hurt sits on top of fear.
Yeah, so it's not so readily apparent. I mean, it's not like obvious that it's about fear, but it is. It always is. And so that's where we have to burrow down to. But even if you can get below the anger to the hurt, that's a great step. Now, to get below the hurt to the fear, I think that's where the healing starts to take place.
Well, before we go any further with this, I want to make clear that it can be really hard to see an angry person that's trying to frighten you as, in fact, frightened themselves.
Yeah. To imagine that the bully is scared is hard. It just seems so removed from just the opposite, it seems to be the case.
Look at our policy in starting 2 wars, not just one, but while we're at it, why don't we start a war in Iraq as well? To see Bush and Cheney and Rumsfeld and the promoters of this war as frightened is not easy for most people.
Right, anger's easy, and hurt. We were hurt, right? But to see, it's all about that ultimate kind of fear for them. It's about terror,
right?
And they even call this whole thing about terrorism. That's the whole thing to them. It's not about anger. It's not about hurt. It's about being terrified. And I think for those people, it's really being terrified of their historical perspective of like how they screwed up. But whatever it is, they are personally terrified.
So the decision was made, we're going to be more terrible than the terrorist. And
we think it's terrific to do that.
We will fight fear with fear. We will fight hatred with hatred. And
if you think fighting fire with fire makes sense, why do fire people use water? They don't use fire.
Well, they use backfires, but that's where the metaphor ends. It's a very good point. You can't defeat hatred with hatred. You can't defeat fear with fear, and you sure are not going to out-anger somebody. I mean, even when I listen to radio talk shows, now I'm sensitive because I did talk shows for 40 years on the radio, but I listen to a lot of these guys on the right-wing talk shows now. That's pretty much all that's left in the
over 90%.
Last decade or so. And I don't think they understand that the more angry they get, the more red-faced they become. Though it's radio, you can tell, right?
Yeah.
That the fewer brain cells they're using. And that their arguments are getting more simplistic. And I wonder sometimes, well, if they knew that, would they even care? Because maybe their goal
ratings is the key.
Maybe their goal is not to be reasonable, but to upset other people. I'm going to frighten you with my anger, and that's supposed to be good radio. But we know that people are much more involved when they feel safe and relaxed. They're using more brain cells. They're more likely to be interested. It's odd. The basic presumption of television and radio that conflict and fear and anxiety attracts listeners is wrong and never been proven, never even really been tested seriously. People would much rather be involved from a place of feeling safe and interested and intrigued. And I'm sure the pendulum will swing. Someday we'll have that in media again. But my God, Steve, we have to deal with the birthers, right?
Oh, man.
That's a little scary. Nobody's angry here, or few people are angry, but even that's scary because...
10 elected congresspeople actually are like believing this, human beings that not only like went to school but got elected to Congress. Actually believe that do they actually believe he's like an illegal alien, an undocumented alien? Is that what they're saying?
I think it's code. I think it's racism, basically. The woman at the Delaware town hall meeting that really revived all of this stomped her foot and said, I want my country back. What they're saying is, what are these colored people doing in the White House?
Yeah.
That's what it's all about. But even then, we're dealing with ignorance, you see, and that angry people become irrational, and we have to be not only rational to manage it, but calm. It takes two qualities. It takes mental reasoning, but also a calm emotional nature, to understand that all anger is rooted, like everything else that hurts, in fear. But more to the point, right under that anger is the hurt that needs to be understood. And once it's understood, you're not angry anymore. Or if you've still got a residue in your body, it's easy to breathe through it, to let go, to apologize, to appeal for a better understanding, to do whatever you do as you regain that rational nature. But I guess what I find so fascinating about this topic is not only do people lose control emotionally, but they're out of their minds. They lose brain cells, literally. They become mentally, what's the word I want? I don't want to say stupid. Mentally dull, unaware. How about that? Just like robotic. When did anybody have an argument with their spouse or some other family member and in the middle of it suddenly get a revelation or a powerful insight about what's really going on? That never happens. You just get dumber and dumber and dumber. The powerful insights, the ahas that we get.
Or the I should have said.
Those come later. Those come when you're in the shower or taking the dog for a walk. So wouldn't it make sense that to be reasonable, to learn to manage your emotional and your mental nature in these situations would require some slow, deep breathing and some letting go. I think even naming the feeling would help. Wouldn't it be a good start to say, this is making me really angry. I'm getting really upset here. Not as a way of threatening anybody, but just, if two people are angry, I'd rather spend time with the one who says I'm angry than the one that's silently just doing a slow burn over in the corner. That guy is a lot more dangerous than the reasonable person that says, you're starting to really upset me, Michael. I can deal with that. Oh, dude, I'm sorry. Can we find some middle ground here? Where does it hurt? I don't know if I'd say that, but who hurt you? It's a good question we can ask ourselves.
So let's make this really simple. There are really only the two emotions, the love-based emotions and the fear-based emotions. And the fear-based emotions make us think, I don't want to die. And the love-based emotions make us think, I want to grow. I want to get better. So when we're off into the side of our brain that is the fear-based, it doesn't really care much about anything except survival. And so because we've confused this anger thing, which is really hurt, which is really fear, with fear of dying, fear of losing consciousness, fear of losing ourselves.
It's just I don't know what I'm afraid of.
We move away from being human and toward being animal. It's very simple because it's our animal-like qualities that have allowed us to survive. It's the fight or flight instinct. It's the strength and speed. It's not our reasoning. It's not our capacity for problem solving. It's not our ability to discern things that might happen in the future. That's our survival is based on how fast we run and how hard we hit. And when we get angry, the part of our brain that wants to survive and doesn't really much care about the ramifications afterward, we want to make sure we don't die now, takes over. The angrier we get, the more that part of our brain, that primitive part of our brain takes over. It's not really a side of our brain. It's like the outer evolved part stops functioning and the inner primitive part takes over.
And I think we're going to evolve beyond this, too. You're talking about a holdover that we all experience from the law of the jungle days.
Yep.
When there really were wild animals and predators and
but that was only yesterday in terms of the evolution of the species.
Right. Time is a relative thing. So a few thousand years is a blink of an eye when it comes to the evolution of humanity. But,
Hawaii was in the Stone Age 300 years ago. Literally, Stone Age, 300-400 years ago. So, it evolves, but it takes time.
So I can really see an acceleration of evolution in this regard. I don't know that Darwin's idea of evolution, the evolution of the physical species, is going to accelerate, but the evolution of consciousness we can get our hands on. And to admire people who manage their feelings. Think about it now. Wouldn't that be a wonderful gift to give yourself to learn not to be angry? Better said, to spot it coming a mile away and manage it, not repress it, not ignore it, deny it, or cash it away, but bring it up as soon as you feel it and say, where is the hurt in here? Knowing that anything that hurts is born of fear, which is always about something you don't know, and guess who's at the center of all the things you don't know? Guess who's the main character in all the things you don't know about your life? Well, of course, you are. So to know thyself, we come back to that. If all fear needs understanding as an antidote, let's go to the bullseye. It's understanding you. Why are you angry? If this person that just upset you said that same thing to 9 other people, he'd get different reactions from each of the 10, right? So personalize it. Make it about you. Take some ownership of it. This is We're repeating this most important part because this is the most important part, to take ownership of all of your feelings.
I mean, wouldn't it be cool if you could catch yourself just before you raised your voice? I mean, wouldn't it be cool if you can catch yourself just before you said that defensive, cutting, hurtful remark? Wouldn't it be cool if you could catch yourself just before you behaved in an angry way and were able to stop and say, wait, where's the hurt? And to discover what it was that hurt, and then to express that instead.
Or maybe not say anything.
Maybe just walk away. That's certainly an option.
It's a crazy concept, but when you don't know what to say, why not try saying nothing?
Yeah, that works. And you can do that in a non-angry way too. You can like ponder, you can think about it.
Crazy idea. And if you don't know what to do, how about learning not to do anything? I think the problem that we have is the urgency that these negative emotions like anger brings on. Like, well, I don't know what to say, but I got to say something.
Yeah. Error on the side of taking that extra moment to think about it.
Just don't say anything. How about just take a breath and relax?
Great time to look before you leap.
Yeah.
So to me, the real secret in the evolution of my experience with anger was, how soon could I catch it? I always eventually I caught it, right? Like after I was screaming and yelling, I always regretted having done that. So it was never like, oh, I'm glad I went through that. I always thought there would be a better way to do it than to scream and yell at somebody. But now I'm catching it before it even begins. And that's, to me, something I'm really, really proud of, because it may just have saved my marriage. If I couldn't figure that one out, I don't know how I made this one work.
What do we say, though, to people, Steve, who really are invested in their right to be angry? And they feel that somehow that's a defense mechanism. It's a shield that they can put up. They can yell and scream, and people go away. That's the polarity I wanted to talk about, too. When we're angry, we want to push people away. We don't want to bring them close. So it does take expanded awareness, that higher self that we develop in paradise, in the alpha brainwave level, to recognize the benefit of managing, of bringing someone close, to resolve the issue. I think anytime again, this is the electromagnetism of the love and the fear. Love always attracts you. Fear always repels you.
Absolutely.
And it's confusing and confounding, because we'll complain, well, you made me angry and now I feel alone. Well, wait a minute. Your fear of my anger, which resulted in your anger, we're both pushing each other away, right? So It gets convoluted, and then I'm angry because you're angry, and you're angry because I'm angry about you being angry, and blame. And if we could just abandon the concept of blame when it comes to understanding our feelings. I mean, even self-blame. It's not switching blame from the blame of others to I blame myself. It's like, just drop the idea of blame and step into responsibility. Those emotions were evoked. They came out of you, not at you. And we know this about physical pain, right? Somebody hits me with a baseball bat, I know the pain is about this area where I've been bruised by the baseball bat. This pain tells me nothing about the baseball bat, tells me nothing about the person wielding the baseball bat. It's telling me about the condition of my body. Well, if I know that about physical pain, why is it so hard for us to accept that about a broken heart?
Yeah, it's I think, physiological in some respects, because with physical pain, we have a chemical in our brain that makes us forget how much it hurt. But with emotional pain, we actually have to work through the hurt and get to the other side of it. So it's much more difficult.
Or it comes back.
Yeah. So we're talking about getting to the place where you can have a conversation with somebody about what's hurting each other instead of about what's angering each other. And it's because ultimately your desire is to push people away. You can do that in kind and polite ways, if that's your ultimate desire. But if you don't want to push people away, then anger is never the right expression. Now, I'm not saying anger is the never right emotion. You can feel anger. It's perfectly appropriate to feel anger. But if you're not trying to push somebody else away, if you don't want to scare somebody, don't express angrily. It's as simple as that. Anytime you raise your voice or lose your temper, you terrify other human beings. Now, if you believe that you're supposed to do unto others as you would have others do unto you, then and you don't want other people to terrify you, then I think it's absolutely inappropriate to terrify them. You can express to them what you're feeling without screaming and yelling, but you can only do that if you catch yourself before you start doing that, because everybody's going to go to do that unless they do catch themselves. The autopilot is on survival above all else, and so when you get angry, you're going to get angrier and angrier and angrier and angrier. That's just the way it's always going to go unless you pull the plug, unless you step outside, unless you become conscious, unless you wake up. And again, all that takes is a conscious deep breath, a conscious. I'm breaking the pattern of my thinking here. I'm taking my mind off of getting angrier and angrier and angrier, and I'm now going to think about getting calm for a second and focusing my mind. And when I do that, now I can get below the anger. I can still be angry. I mean, what's changed? Nothing's changed. I was angry before. I'm angry now. But now I'm in control, and I have the ability to choose my even-tempered, well-reasoned response.
There you go. One of the principles of reflective communication, which is used by counselors and therapists and even coaches to resolve, even mediators to resolve conflict, to use a sentence like this: I'm angry because I feel. Now that's very different than I'm angry because you.
Right.
Right. So that's a very important change in position. And as long as you're in an argument that's about, I'm angry because you, and you are the reason, and, well, you started it, well, you
I
said...
feel this because you did that.
And we'll even go back to history.
Right.
Well, 6 months ago, and remember that 18 years ago when you. What are you going to do with that kind of language but frighten the other person?
Right.
Increase the likelihood that that's going to bring up their hurt, and therefore the likelihood that they're going to be angry.
Yeah. And a lot of people really don't know what their feelings really are to be able to express them. They don't know the difference between thoughts and feelings. You know, the old story about the couple at the therapist, and the therapist says to the wife, what are you feeling? And she says, well, I'm feeling hurt and sad, and I'm feeling lonely. And she turns to the husband and says, what are you feeling? And says, I feel she's a bitch. You know, I mean, it's like, that's not a feeling, you know, but some people don't really get what feelings are all about. Anger, I think, is the one feeling that everybody understands as a feeling. Like, we all know anger. Everybody knows anger. I think it's one of the first ones we experience. The first expressions of fear we have is in childhood is fear and then anger. You know, that's like one of the earliest ones. So we all know anger as a feeling. But I think you put your finger on it when you said, as long as we blame other people for it, we're justified in expressing it back at them because they did us first. Whereas if we understand it's a wound inside of ourselves, then that shifts everything. That just changes your consciousness about it.
Then to remember to say, again, I think the anger needs to be expressed. And if it's going to be expressed reasonably in a communication with somebody that you're, quote, angry with, right, then express it as, I'm feeling angry, even before you begin to demonstrate it in other ways. I'm feeling angry because I feel hurt, because I feel lonely, because I feel unconsidered, or whatever it is, but make it personal. That doesn't mean the other person isn't going to argue. They still may argue with you. They may discount your feelings, or demean or degrade or ridicule you for, well, then you got to take a look at what kind of marriage you're in, or what is the nature of this relationship, or can we get some professional help? Because both partners need to be on board with these basic rules. And to call time out in the middle of an argument and say, wait, I'm all confused, this is what we always do, can we just take 5 or 10 minutes? And then when you do come back to, or half an hour, whatever, and then when you do come back together, to make those I feel statements instead of you always and you never, wow, that's the freedom right there.
And it changes everything. And it sometimes can be, an hour or 5 minutes or 5 seconds. I mean, it could happen in just, wait a minute. Let me think about that for a second and take 5 seconds and take that one slow breath. To me, one of the biggest keys, again, is the earlier you catch yourself about to go into inappropriate anger, the better. And I did a little exercise, an alpha exercise with myself a little while ago when I was dealing with this anger thing with my wife, and I closed my eyes and I asked myself, okay, what's like the earliest warning sign that I'm about to like yell? What's the earliest symptom I have that I'm about to like say something sarcastic or mean or cruel, or I'm about to be defensive, And I noticed it was, I take this short breath, like if I get wounded, and I can hear it in my ear, that noise, and so I triggered my brain whenever I hear. I go, wait a minute. Don't talk. Don't say anything yet.
That's the verbal version of girding your loins.
Yes,
the sound of preparing for battle.
Right, exactly. And so it's like, whoa. Oh. So I caught myself before I said one wrong word, before I even put on the wrong face. It's like that noise. Oh, that noise. Wait a minute. So I'm sure that everybody else has a different trigger, but everybody has one. So think about it. You've been angry a lot of times in your life. You've yelled at people, I'm sure, several times, if not a million times in your life. Think back to those experiences. To me, again, they are the few times I'm really ashamed of in my life, is when I inappropriately yelled at my grandma, Think back to those times and see if you can remember, maybe your body started getting tense, or maybe you had that breath thing, or maybe you started staring. Pay attention to the biofeedback of the experience of inappropriate expressions of anger. Because, if you can cut that off right before you yell, before you say that defensive or sarcastic remark, and instead go to the hurt, or at least choose to, okay, I'm going to say that sarcastic remark anyway, but at least choose, not just blurt, that changes your life in some really wonderful ways.
The phrase, seeing red, occurs to me.
Yeah.
I saw red. Or some people just may feel their palms getting sweaty, or men may begin to make fists. Women are less likely to make a fist. If they're going to hit you, it probably will be a slap. There are gender differences here, too, but what we're talking about is it takes practice to become aware of the early warning signals of anger. And guess where that practice is best accomplished? That's right. We call it paradise, finding yourself in paradise. The alpha brainwave level, that wonderful, safe, and relaxed place of focused concentration, focused passion even. But the passion is not anger. That's not the passion we're talking about, but the passion of love that is peace and a desire to understand. That focused passion. I think there are a lot of folks that only feel passion as out-of-control excitement and enthusiasm, whether it's anger or lust or, whatever. The idea of being deeply at peace and in a paradise level of consciousness, and to feel that spiritual fire, that spiritual passion in a place where you're deeply relaxed, may sound a little contradictory, but I'm bringing it up because you really got to work at it, especially if you're at a site called focusedpassion.com. We're not talking about focused lust or focused anger, but that paradise, that place of peace where you have choices. And when you're angry, you can say, well, maybe yelling hurtful things and bringing up the past is not the smartest strategy. Maybe I could relax and use more of my brain cells instead of less.
So that sounds like a great idea. Let's relax and use more of our brain cells instead of less. Sometimes less is more. That's true with brainwave activity. Less brainwave activity sometimes is much more in terms of higher consciousness. So we're going to do a little alpha journey here, a guided imagery exercise into the place where anger is not danger, the place where anger is safe. Outside in the real world, anger can be very dangerous, but in this world, inside in paradise, you can take anger and transform it to something that can help you get better and better every single day. So let's start by shutting out the outside world. Close your eyes. And then focusing in on the inside world by taking one slow, conscious, deep breath. And release, and start your paradise thinking in this place of perfect peace.
It's not possible to remain angry or fearful as you're relaxing. You're still in touch with feelings like anger and fear, but there's a level of mindfulness, a degree of detachment. It's almost like your anger is hanging in the closet. It's yours. It's clothing you could put on and wear around, but you choose not to. It's over there, and you're going to look at it. That's the detachment. That's the mindfulness. That's the level of awareness that feeling safe and relaxed and exploring this inner paradise of perfect peace will bring you. So go there. Continue to take a couple of minutes to practice feeling safe and relaxed. And then you can begin to practice how to better manage the feelings that can really hurt and really create anger and even violent, regrettable behavior. Feelings that we want to anticipate so that we can manage them while they're still just little guys. Because you see, we really want to anticipate anger and fear and hurt so that you can manage it while it's still small before it becomes unreasonable and gets out of hand. You want to see it coming down the road so you can, well, I'm mixing my metaphors, but nip it in the bud.
So remember, if something you say or something you do makes me angry, my first thought needs to be there's something in me that needs to be healed. My first place to go is inside of me and not outside at you. Stop. Just as if I were physically injured, where does it hurt? I'm emotionally injured. Where does it hurt? Where does it hurt? What hurts? And so I can stop and choose what I'm next to do instead of behaving automatically in an angry way. I stop and choose to do what's next for me to do. I don't have to do or say anything in particular. I don't have to respond. I don't have to react. I don't have to get mad or yell. I have choices. And I can, rather than knee-jerk, I can choose to take a deep breath, and with all the powers of my mind to use, I can think, what hurts? Why am I angry? What made me angry there? What about what you said hurts me so? Take a moment. That's the first place to go, not out there at the person who yelled or the person who said something mean, but inside. Inside. That's the place that needs to be seen.
There is enormous strength in your willingness to be vulnerable, to be sensitive to all of your feelings, but especially the ones that hurt and frighten you. Because somebody can hurt you once, and somebody else hurt you in a similar way. And then because of the nature of life, we get hurt again, and maybe nothing really redeems any of that hurt, and it builds, and someone else comes along and hurts you one more time, and it's like the proverbial straw that broke the camel's back. Suddenly you're screaming and you're yelling and you're out of your mind with anger and rage at this accumulated hurt and fear. But the person who just said this one little thing is looking at you like, wow, why are you so angry at me? All I said was, and you're still screaming at them, and Wouldn't it be nice to handle these issues one at a time so they don't accumulate? To remain conscious and clear and present in your awareness of why you feel the way you feel? Some things may really bother you. Certain situations might really upset you. You're prone to be extra sensitive in this area or that. The strength we're talking about comes from your ability and your willingness to face it and to be vulnerable, to be sensitive and open to the insight. Oh, well, no wonder I got upset. Well, no wonder that hurt me. Well, no wonder I'm afraid. I didn't realize that this is what I was really afraid of, that this was the reason I've been hurt all my life in this area, and this is why I tend to get angry and lash out. Work it backwards from the top down. Get a sense of like a hierarchy with anger and rage and even potential violence at the top. And underneath that, the hurt that comes again and again and again, and underneath that at the roots, the fear, the false evidence appearing real, F-E-A-R. That's what fear is. It's always things unknown. As you know it, as you understand it, the hurt, and then the anger, it all goes away. That whole hierarchy, the anger, the hurt underneath it, the fear at its root. Understanding is the antidote.
And we're not saying never behave angrily. We're saying do so only when you choose. Make anger another one of the tools in your quiver, another arrow that you can use. But choose to be angry in a way that works. And the best way is to get beneath to what most hurts. And sometimes you can even get instantly clear and understand what's beneath the hurt is the fear. But get beneath the yelling, the meanness, the cruelty. Get beneath behaving in a way that you don't like. Choose to experience the anger in a way that helps you get better, helps you grow. Anger is a feeling, but how you behave with the anger is always a choice. If you take a deep breath, it's always a choice. It's always a place you can go.
And often that's enough. But remember, if you do want to communicate with an individual, your spouse, another family member, somebody that you work with, an important relationship that you don't want to lose, go back to that person and use sentences that begin with the word I rather than the word you. Whether you apologize, whether you ask for forgiveness, whether you announce you'll forgive the other person, everybody ought to forgive everybody. That just means put it down, but you've got to understand it. You can't manage other people. You can't manage their thoughts or feelings. But once you manage your own, you can say, I was angry because I felt, and because I tend to feel. And there have been a lot of times in my life where I was hurt again and again, and much of that happened in my youth where I didn't really understand. I didn't have the skills, but now I understand. Forgive me. It was just about my hurt and my confusion. I was angry because I felt. Just avoid those you made me angry, and you always, and you never, and dredging up the past. You'll be amazed at how much easier relationships can be.
So taking anger and using it in the proper way in your life, putting it into the proper perspective when you're experiencing the strife, choosing to go beneath the anger, to the hurt, to the fear, so you don't yell, you don't scream, and your mind gets clear. It's one of the most constructive things you can possibly do, because anger is one of the most destructive things that you can allow to come through. So, with anger in check, I think it's time now to come back to the world of wide awake. So as it feels comfortable for you, take a deep breath, bring your awareness back to the physical location you're in. As your eyes open and you come wide awake, once again you become wide awake.
From narrow awake, paradise thinking, to wide awake. A lot more going on up here. We are human beings. We have these vulnerabilities. Again, separate liberal or conservative from bleeding heart and whatever happens to be your politics.
If bleeding heart is like a philanthropist, then Gates and Buffett are the biggest bleeding hearts of all time.
It's a beautiful thing.
Very conservative people.
Sensitive and kind, whatever your political views. Allow your heart to bleed. Allow yourself to be sensitive. This is where beauty and truth and even justice is found. But you got to find it in your heart before you'll ever see it in someone else's.
So if you know someone in your life who's dealing with an angry person, who has somebody in their life that is angry all the time, send them this. Just go to our website, go to the Send One to a Friend button, and send them this program on anger, because I think understanding what anger is about will help them handle angry people in their lives.
Yeah, just don't say you need this. Say, this helped me. I thought you might be interested.
Yeah, like, I know you're having trouble with your kid or with your mother-in-law or with so-and-so, so this will help you deal with them.
Yeah. So use that Share One with a Friend tool that's right there on the built-in player at focusedpassion.com. Remember, you got 3 basic ways to listen to all of these programs. The built-in player with the Send One to a Friend gadget at focusedpassion.com, and then with a single click at any time, you can send these programs to your iTunes software if it's already on your computer. If not, it's a free download from apple.com, or the RSS reader that is built into every single browser. Some folks say, I don't know what an RSS reader is. You don't need to. Just click the orange button, and you can listen to these programs in your browser. Okay, play around with it. We're supporting you in every way. Streaming, podcasts. These premium audio programs are yours to send to as many people as you want, as often as you'd like. Help yourself, and then pass it on. Thanks very much for being with us. As always, be gentle, love life, and take care of each other. For Steve Snyder, this is Michael Benner. Aloha from Maui.